This has to do with where I'm going this morning. Bedrock. Bedrock. Pardon me? Fred Flintstone. Oh, yes, the bedrock. Beneath the soil. Now, my question is, Sam, and others who are familiar with Saskatchewan, my question is, how deep is bedrock in Saskatchewan? Have you ever encountered around here? Not, yeah. I know some places it's exposed, but I couldn't find information on this area, but I read that bedrock can be like hundreds of feet below, depending on where you're at. But it's that hard surface. You get past the soil, you get past the gravel, and you hit bedrock. And in some places, you want to build on the bedrock. Some places it's not hard to find. I think in our part of the world, we have a large bunch of soil before we would even hit bedrock. But there's another meaning for that term bedrock as we use it in English, and that's you have some strong ideas, you have some principles, you have some facts, and that is a bedrock belief for you. Some churches may have a list of their bedrock beliefs. They're the basics of their faith community's beliefs. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, writing to the Christians there, he sets out some bedrock beliefs. And he says, this is a bedrock belief. If Christ has not been raised, if the resurrection is not true, then our preaching is useless, and so is our faith. And he says, if none of that is true, then we might as well eat and drink, for tomorrow we die, quoting a poet of his day. And that's, I think, a bedrock belief for us as Christians. If you don't hold to the death, burial, or resurrection of Christ, that's the foundation of our faith. For the next few weeks, I want to talk about some bedrock beliefs that, as I was thinking about this last night and this morning, what I want to talk about are maybe not quite bedrock beliefs, but they're important beliefs to build on the bedrock. So I may have to reconfigure, rethink my titling of this. But things that are important to our faith, things that are important for that bedrock. Not as foundational as maybe the resurrection or the fact that Christ was the Son of God, but beliefs that can make for that solid foundation of faith as we follow Jesus. And so I want to begin with one that maybe is, and I think most of these, as we go through them in the coming weeks, will be things that we don't necessarily think about as important, but I think in Scripture they are really important to our faith. And the first one is talking about friends. The number of friends that we have in life in North America has actually been declining. Social studies indicate that it's been happening for the past 30 years. And it really accelerated, as so many things did, during COVID. But just think about life without friends, how seriously limited life is without friends. And the importance of friendships is what undergirds that concern by sociologists and scientists of human behavior. That's why they're concerned. Sam mentioned, the amount of time we spend watching television, the amount of time we spend on our various internet-connected devices. And that, I know one of the apps is called FaceTime, but it actually, so many of our apps take away from FaceTime. You don't need to raise your hand if you've ever done this, but but I have seen couples seated in a restaurant having a romantic dinner together, and they're both busy on their phones. And so our technology, the things we hold in front of our faces, the time that we spend online and not interacting with people is a serious concern in our day and age. And I think we're, in the last couple of years, we're starting to see a serious rethink, a serious reconsideration of that. And maybe for our adults, we're kind of left on our own, but for our students in schools at least, it's become quite widespread in the last year or so that various school boards, various school districts, systems are saying, leave your phones at home, leave them off when you're in the classroom. Friendship, it just doesn't happen. It doesn't continue on unless we give it some intention, unless we take some action, unless we take some deliberate care. That needs cultivation, needs intentionality. You can't ignore friends, and you can't keep friends unless you expend some effort on that. In June of last year, the New York Times published a 5-day friendship challenge, and it claimed that these articles that were being presented were science-backed strategies that could help revive and deepen close ties. In other words, the suggestion was you need to invest some time into a friendship. And even after years of being apart, and you've encountered this with good friends, you may not talk with them regularly, you may not see them regularly, but you get together, you meet again, and you just pick up from where you seemingly left off 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. I experienced some of this past summer when we went out to BC for a seniors retreat, and all my friends that I had when I was younger, they're all old people now, and I don't know what happened, but we just pick up. One guy he lives in the southern in Texas now, and I hadn't seen him for probably 30, 40 years, and we just picked up and continued on from where we left off, talking about the Flintstones, the last up. No. Anyways, all of that, why am I talking about friendship? Because Jesus actually speaks about friendship. Jesus actually uses the word friends quite a bit. He addressed people as friends during his ministry. And here's one example, just one example, from Luke chapter 5. This is an account where some men bring a friend who is paralyzed, and they bring him to Jesus. And they can't get him in to the place where Jesus is because there's such a crowd. And so they cut a hole in the roof, and they lower the man down on a pallet. And this is what Jesus says, verse 20. When Jesus sees their faith, he looks at the man and he says, "Friend, your sins are forgiven. Take up your bed and walk." But maybe the most important words that Jesus ever articulated, ever said about friendship, we find in John 15. And I know the women's Bible study, which will resume in March, has been going through John. They're already past this chapter in John 15. This is the best quote on friendship. Comes from verse 13. Do you see it there? You may have heard it. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. That's the best quote on friendship that you can find anywhere. But then Jesus goes on. He says to his disciples, and by extension to you and me, he says, "I now call you friends." You are no longer servants, but friends. You are my friends, verse 14, if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants or slaves, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. The friendship of the best friend that we can ever have. And this is really a theme in the Gospel of John. In the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the idea of friend and friendship is not as prominent as you find it in the Gospel of John. In Luke and in Matthew, there is mention of friends, but oftentimes it has a negative context. Luke refers to friends who hand over Christians in times of persecution, not a very positive mention. In Matthew, Jesus as a friend is a source of criticism. Jesus is actually criticized by his opponents for the friends that he hangs around with. They accuse Jesus of being what? They say, you are a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And so again, it's not a very positive reflection upon friends in these Gospels. But in the Gospel of John, we get a different story. And the word for friend actually occurs about 6 times at least throughout this Gospel. And Jesus is mentioned. Jesus is mentioned in John chapter 3, where he changes the water into wine. He's mentioned as the friend of the bridegroom. And Jesus, in chapter 11, when Lazarus dies, he refers to Lazarus as our friend. And we're told in John chapter 10 that the good shepherd lays down his life for his friends. And then in the passage we have just looked at, the disciples are elevated from servants, from slaves, to friends. This talk in John 15 comes right after Jesus has talked about, and he's used the metaphor of the vine and the branches. And he talks about how for disciples, following Jesus means friendship with Jesus and with God. And being a disciple is being a branch of the vine. It's being connected to the vine. It's relational. And so Jesus uses the term for those who follow him, for you and for me as followers of Jesus. He says, we are friends. I will no longer call you servants. I call you friends. And so we have an invitation here. We have an invitation to friendship. Friendship that is compelling. Friendship that is challenging. Friendship that is continuing. And that friendship that you and I can have with Jesus is foundational for our faith. Jesus is Lord of my life. And we need to remember that. We confess that Jesus is Lord. But at the same time, we can say, Jesus is my friend. And Jesus is the most important friend that I have in my life. Jesus doesn't just want us to have a low-level experience of him. He doesn't want us simply to read about him in the Bible, to know about him from a story. He wants to be our friend. He wants our friendship. And think about this. He is inviting you and me to a remarkable personal friendship. I read about an incident involving a somewhat well-known minister of years ago. He served as chaplain in the U.S. Senate. His name was Dr. Lloyd Ogilvie. And on one occasion, he was called upon to address a group of more than 2,000 women at a conference. And the woman who was to introduce him got up to the microphone and began to introduce Ogilvie. And she said, "I want to introduce you to the most dynamic person you will ever meet in your life. He's exciting, he is positive, he is engaging. He can reach down inside of you more deeply than anyone else you've ever known. And he will give you self-confidence, he will give you courage, and a whole lot of other things that you've always wanted in your life, but you haven't found." And Ogilvie is thinking, whoa, he's kind of sinking down in his chair. He can't believe that this is kind of the introduction that's being given before he gets up to speak. He's never heard an introduction like this before. He's never been introduced like this before. He's embarrassed because he knows, I can't live up to that billing. But the woman continued. She says, "The person that I am talking about is Jesus Christ. And here to tell you about him is Dr. Ogilvie." Just like our human friendships, friendship with Jesus needs cultivation, right? Needs action. We just can't say Jesus is my friend and not do anything. I can't expect a living friendship without time and energy put into it. Friends take time. Friends take intentionality. And it's no different then when it comes to our friendship with Jesus. We can't have a vibrant, vital friendship with Jesus without some effort. So there's at least two principles that I can think of for a friendship with Jesus. And they actually come from the lips of Jesus himself. He uses a couple of important words for the friendship that he desires to have with us. And one of the words is abide, and the other is the word follow. Now, this first word, abide, this isn't a word that we use too much anymore. It's not a part of our everyday language. In John 15, a number of Bible versions keep the word abide. If you're reading out of the New International Version, it chooses the word remain. So instead of Jesus saying, "Abide in me," your translation may say something like, "Remain in me." But, abide is a good word, just because we don't use it anymore. Abide is a good word. Abide has some durability. Jesus says, "Abide in me, and I will abide in you." Jesus wants to give us a new relationship with God. And that relationship does not come just from outside, it comes from inside. And that's why we're here this morning. That's why we gather here every week to worship. That's why we have Bible studies. That's why we have Bible classes for whether you're the youngest among us or the oldest among us. That's why we do that, because abiding, having that relationship with God, has to come from within. We have to expend some effort on it. That's why every Sunday we have the Lord's Supper. This journey to abide, to remain, it's vital. And friendship with Jesus needs abiding. And so abide may not be a word that we use too much these days, but it is a very important word for our journey of faith. Abide in me, and I will abide in you. And the second vital principle for our friendship with Jesus is in this word, follow. Jesus calls us to abide and follow. Because he says in John 15:14, "You are my friends if you do what I command you." If you follow. Well, we've had lots of snow past week or so. And do you remember, maybe you still do this when it snows. Sometimes I find sometimes I do this if I'm out walking the dog and I see somebody else's footsteps. I get curious. Whose footsteps are these? My footsteps? No, they're not mine, because I can't. But maybe as a child, do you remember? For those of us who grew up in a part of the country where there's snow, where you try to follow the exact footsteps of someone who has walked ahead of you. Or maybe if it's not snow, maybe it's the dirt or something, and just following, trying to do that. And in many ways, when it comes to being a friend of Jesus, I'm still trying to do that. I'm still trying to follow in his steps. And friendship with Jesus comes when I live a life that walks where Jesus walked. And sometimes that may not necessarily be the places that I would choose to walk. So as we follow in the steps of our friend Jesus, we try to walk where Jesus has walked. And the keys to this friendship, I think, can be found in these two words: abide, remain, and follow. And that's the journey that we're on. And it's a life-lifting, life-changing friendship that we can have with Jesus. There's that old hymn, the old hymn that many of you may be familiar with. What a friend we have in Jesus. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Jesus as a friend. You know, Jesus as our friend, he's a friend that will never let us down. Sometimes that happens with friends, right? Jesus is a friend who will never disappoint. Jesus is a friend who will never tease or torment. He'll never belittle you. Jesus is a friend who understands my worst moments without losing sight of my best. Jesus is the transforming friendship for my life. Well, there's lots of mysteries. There's lots of things about life, about faith that I don't understand and I will never understand. But I know the one who is my friend. I know the one who has called me his friend. And I know the one who offers me his friendship. What's the meaning of life? What's the bottom line? To have that friendship. To have that friendship with Jesus. That's what it's all about. Next week, I want to talk about the mystery and the power of prayer in our lives as we continue to think about some things that are foundational for our faith. But we begin with that critical understanding of our friendship with Jesus. Jesus is our friend. We're going to enjoy our lunch together here in just a little bit, and we'll give thanks for that, and then we will be on our way. But as we continue through this day, as you begin this new week, Remember that you are called and loved by God the Father and kept safe by Jesus Christ. And his mercy, his peace, and love will be with you. Remember, Jesus is our friend.